Hello and welcome to the Extinction Protocol Radio. We are coming to you live from outside of Philadelphia. I'm your host, Lisa Varley, and my co host is author, poet, and blogger, and many other wonderful things, Alvin Conway. How are you today, Alvin?
I'm good. How are you?
I am really, really excited to be back. So much has happened since the last time that we broadcast, and I think that we would have to do a 5 hour show just to cover the things that have happened in the last 20 to 30 days.
I know.
And then I think I'm being conservative in that estimate of 5 hours. I mean, because I think we could even discuss everything about those topics. I mean, that is just craziness.
Yeah, a lot of stuff happening. Very accelerated change happening very quickly, very dramatic fashion.
Yeah, and it's actually quite frightening and quite intimidating. And at the same time, it's quite fascinating because of the changes that are occurring and the things that are happening to people.
Hmm.
It's just horrendous.
Hmm.
So I don't know. What do you think that we can expect? Maybe in the next few months, next year. Uh, What are we looking for? Like, what are we to pay attention to?
Well, I think the future is going to be very interesting. We're approaching some very dramatic times, and I think what's fascinating about all the change that we're seeing is there are signs and there are events, and the two. What we're seeing now is signs, as dramatic as they're not events. The events haven't happened yet. But these are signs, and that's again another cause for concern because these are basically symptoms of like of the disease. You see the manifestations of disease, the chills, the fever, and the body aches. But that's not the diagnosis. The diagnosis is actually the malady is actually the disease that's going to be coming. And so these are signs telling us more serious and more even disturbing changes are going to happen to our planet. Now, when you try to put this in some kind of a context, the change is happening so quickly. It's happening. It's affecting all the processes. It's sort of disorientating for a lot of people when you try to understand it. But I think as we go into the future, there are some things that we probably may want to be on the lookout for. Things that we're probably going to see happen, and a list of those things are probably what the future holds. We call them planetary perils. We probably in our lifetime, this may not be tomorrow, but it probably be within our lifetime sometime in the next 10 to 15 or 20 years. Maybe a nuclear bomb or dirty bomb detonated in a major city. A 9.5 magnitude earthquake striking one of the subduction zones, or maybe even something higher. Perhaps a supervolcano or volcanoes going off or erupting somewhere on the planet. Maybe one of those events occurring. Now, this is not a time frame. It could happen sometime in the next, 20, 30 years. It could be the next 50 years. But we will probably see this in our lifetime, since most of the listeners are probably under the age of 50. So most of this, we're likely to probably see something like this happen. A magnitude 8.5 earthquake striking a large city like Mexico City, Tokyo, Manila, one of the cities, the large cities. A major meteor striking the planet from something that we perhaps didn't see coming. You know, a major conflict in the Middle East, cataclysm killing 1 million people. In one event. And last, there's a couple other, the outbreak of a global conflict, and of course, a global economic collapse from the present system that is, of course, being strained and propped up in all these fiat money spending measures. So we have some very dramatic times before us and some very dramatic events that probably on the horizon that we should be sort of acclimate ourselves to the possibility of these events happening. And I think sometimes when you can at least discuss them in a rational way without the fear context, it might be a little bit easier to accept them as a possibility of happening, and you might be a little bit less traumatized by the events as they start to unfold.
Oh, bless.
If that makes sense.
No. Any of those, I'm going to be traumatized. I really am. Any of those. I couldn't even pick one that would say, all right, I can work my brain to chill out a little bit. No. Mm-mm.
Well, I think the downside of that, if we have to experience all these events, and I think that's, that's a cause for concern. If we have to experience one or two on the list is bad enough, but if we have to go through all of them, then that's some serious trauma that the planet and the people on the planet are going to have to be subjected to.
Now, what is there's always probabilities, but is there a likelihood? Is it more likely that we're going to have those types of things because we're shifting to a different period? I mean, how likely are they to happen? I mean, they could happen. I mean, just
Well,
like
it
I
could
could,
happen.
like
Go ahead.
just like I could get hit by a car.
Right.
The more I run across the street without looking, I'm more likely to happen. But if I don't ever cross the street, it's probably less likely that I would get hit by a car. So
Well,
go ahead.
okay. Well, it's a possibility for it to happen. It's a possibility these things won't happen, but I think it's very likely they will happen because the scenarios are in place. And so it's sort of like you write the programs for a computer program. Um, the programs are in simulation, so the simulation is there. So the actual events are pretty much much more likely to come about. So we see a more geologically active planet. We see a planet with a very explosive population. We see a planet that's densely populated in some very hazardous regions. We already begin to see that with places like Nepal and, of course, Tokyo and Japan, and especially in Asia, Mexico City. So we have a huge concentration of people living in regions that are extremely dangerous. We haven't had these processes to become a factor to cause any great concern. But now, since our planet is becoming more kinetic, these things are a serious concern. So they're much more likely to happen. So the scenarios now are very real. And so we're not trying to excite any kind of fear in anyone. But we are saying that the possibility now, the time frame that we're living in, the events that are happening in the world, and it's hard to foresee any of this. When you talk about the Arab Spring going from Arab Spring to now to ISIS on the march, consolidating land and marching from country to country. I mean, nobody could have foreseen that, 6 or 7, 8 months ago. But, going back to my book, The Extinction Protocol, I talked about the rise of the radicalism in the Middle East and how it would shape the politics and the geopolitics of the region. So I think some of these things, or if we pay attention close enough to them without necessarily being over alarmed or causing us to lose sleep or halt the living of our lives in any way, I think we can sort of see the outlines of some of these events starting to unfold, or at least a possibility of them happening, which is probably as distressing to some as the actual events themselves.
Yeah. And then I guess what you're saying is, we're more likely to survive if we are prepared. And I just don't know necessarily how I could prepare for a lot of that stuff. But I guess emotionally I could prepare for it.
Well, we're still living in the reality that these events can happen. And we live in that reality. I mean, the USGS is starting to have more earthquake drills. But, back before 2012, I mean, nobody was talking about earthquake drills. Now everybody's talking about earthquake drills because I think they've come to the same realization that we've come to, that the possibility of major events happening now, since the planet is definitely becoming more geologically animated, it exists. And so, as frightening as that possibility is to think about, it's realistic now.
I mean, yeah, there is definitely a surge in earthquake events and volcanic events. Are the professionals even acknowledging it, or even acknowledging like why this is even happening?
I don't think anyone knows why it's happening. And I think scientists will continue to be in a state of consternation about why it's happening. I think when you talk about some of these events, since there's no way to predict, we have no real reliable scientific indicators to predict some of these events happening. I think it's still considered fringe science to even be talking about it. And I think, for some people, when you going back to the scenario of Superman, you have Superman's father saying, well, the planet's going to blow up, and no one believed him. And, he said, well, this is going to happen. And they said, well, how can it happen? It's never happened before. And so when you warn people about events that they've never seen, that's never happened before, that science is not talking about, at least in the mainstream media, it's very hard to find a captive audience who will at least be attentive to some of the warnings and admonitions. And we're grateful that we've had the people who followed the blog over the years who read the book and starting to write in, and they're starting to see some of the events that we talked about happening now.
But the majority of people really don't know. They don't really care, and they don't pay attention. I mean, I know that I'm aware of it, and I pay attention to it. And to be honest, there was a part of me that just kind of didn't want to deal with it because I really like my life. So I can see why other people might do that too. It's very easy to do that because the thought of these things, just even in the next 50 years, because it's not even me that I fear. It's for my kids and my grandkids, and I can see why people
Cringe.
Turn the other way and don't pay attention.
Right.
Because it is actually frightening, and not feeling like you have any control is a big contributor, I think, because there's really nothing I can do about it.
Well, there's nothing any of us can do about it. And so if any of these events happen, we have something like a Yellowstone go off or a Toba erupting or any supervolcano erupting, it's pretty much game over for the human race, and we will just have to deal with it. I think we're very fortunate to have lived during a period of relative peace and calm in the so-called last 5,000 or 6,000 years of recorded history, where there hasn't been any really major event. The last major disruption, I don't know if you believe the planet is this old, about 74,000 years with the Toba eruption. And there was about 1 million people, according to scientists. This is what scientists say. There were about 1 million people living on the Earth, and the planet's population was reduced to about 3,000 to 4,000 people. So something like that happening again would be catastrophic because it would basically pretty much wipe the planet clean. Because you got temperatures plunging about 25 degrees all over the planet, so it's just very dramatic changes. Of course, you can't grow anything, and there's ash everywhere, and so it would kill off basically everything on this planet. So those type of scenarios are they're very uncomfortable. They're very scientific, small as far as minute possibility of them happening, but the possibility still exists because these systems are still active and they still are inflating and they still have magma chambers beneath the calderas. So we have to take them as being approach them with some degree of scientific seriousness because the possibility is there, even though it might be remote.
Now, in your book, The Extinction Protocol, you talk about the next. We're looking at all the signs and things like that. Are we going into an extinction period? Like, and would the government or the professionals ever say that that's actually what is happening? Would they ever come out and discuss that with everyone? Or, do they not know? Do they know? I mean, I'm just curious about that. When would they tell us that? When Yellowstone's getting ready to explode? I mean, I don't know.
I think they would tell us. When they would tell us would be a question. I think you'd have to at least approach the public with it to some degree. I mean, it's not something you can hide. Certainly, we know if there's an escalation of geological activity at any volcano because most of the seismic systems, United States, USGS is not the only one that monitor these sites, but we do have a global network of sensors and seismometers that are set up at most of these volcanoes, including webcams. So we have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen as it happens. Now, that doesn't mean it can't happen by surprise. I think about 40% of all volcanic eruptions happen with little or no warning, and we've seen like the last 3 of the last 5 volcanoes that erupted came with no warning. In other words, everything was relatively calm and they just exploded. And so, I put this warning on the website. We should stay off these systems. Resist the temptation. And I'm not saying don't. We should stay away from them and don't climb them and don't get on them. But I'm just saying, as these processes start to escalate, we put ourselves in unnecessary peril by being in these areas where there are known hazards, because a lot of these systems are going to go off with little or no warning, and that may include something like a Yellowstone. And Yellowstone could go off at 3 or 2 in the morning, or even 4 in the morning, with no warning. So you think about something like that happening is really a nightmare for any type of emergency planners.
Yeah, that is. And now, are they likely to do that during the day, the middle of middle of the night?
I think it's very likely. And the thing about it is sort of like the scenario of the frog. If you put, the old scenario, if you put a frog in a pot of boiling water, he's not going to jump out. But if you slowly kind of cook the water, turn up the heat, where he gets acclimated, you cook him alive. You'll be burned alive inside the pot. And I think sometimes
that was horrible.
No, it's true. It's true. So if you turn up the sudden heat, he jumps out. But if you do a slow cook, he'll stay in the pot and be basically cooked alive. My point for mentioning that is going back to Vesuvius. I mean, there were tremors, and people said, well, this is something that's always done. And so up to 3 months before the eruption in 79 that, destroyed that city, people took the tremors for just another sign. It's just doing what it always does. And so that we can be lulled into a false sense of complacency. And the same thing can happen with Yellowstone. People say, well, it's always had earthquakes, But if you think about it, the earthquakes are the signs of something happening. I mean, the volcano is giving you signs already that it's inflating. There's geysers, there's hypothermal, geothermal activity. These are all signs that the volcano's inflating. It's getting ready to do something. Now, whether this happens tomorrow or a week from now, or 1,000 years from now, is a question that nobody can answer. But the signs are already there, and it may take thousands of years for these signs to unfold. So, in other words, if we're looking for a series of earthquakes to happen to warn us that Yellowstone might be getting ready to erupt, that may never happen, because the signs may be unfolding over a 1,000-year period, and because they're not in a condensed time frame, we may miss that opportunity that something's about to happen.
Gotcha.
And so we have to be very careful about that. Everybody's not going to run into the ark, and then you're going to have a sudden rainstorm. These events might be unfolding over a 1,000-year period. So you might say, where were the signs? The signs are all around you. They've always been around you. You just thought they were just nothing normal. And so going back to Vesuvius, people say, well, it's another tremor. It's doing what volcanoes do. It's nothing to be alarmed about. And then all of a sudden, without any warning, the mountain exploded. And so we know the history of that. So our lessons from this is to take these threats very seriously, because these are forces that we have no control over. They're powerful, and they can overwhelm anything that we can possibly imagine. So it's hard to understand number one, what bottles all this pressure and force inside the earth and keeps it from exploding. That's mind-boggling enough that it doesn't explode already, that Yellowstone doesn't blow, and every other supervolcano doesn't blow. The fact that it's being held in check for as long as it is to me is more amazing than it blowing. And so if you sort of you're in a room of dynamite with a match, we're basically living in that type of scenario. So we have to understand that these processes are mercurial. They can explode without much warning, and this is just the way nature works. We have to respect that.
All right. Well, what other signs are we actually seeing that people can pay attention to?
Okay. Okay. we should look at a couple of things that should be a warning to us. And when I talk about extinctions, scientists are already saying we're in the sixth extinction. We've already had 5 previous extinctions. And as Carl Sagan said, extinction is the rule, not the exception. So extinctions happen. They're going to happen. They've been happening all through history. So according to scientists, we've been through 5 periods of this. The Hopis also talk about periods of upheaval, and so we're headed for another one. Scientists say we're now in a 6th extinction. They're talking about the attrition of fauna and flora, which is animal and flora, and plant life on the planet. But when I look at extinction, I look at something a little bit different. I'm looking at a geological event or series of events that may happen over a short period of time, a condensed period of time, and maybe a protracted period of time. And what happens is the planet, after it goes through this period, it shifts into another dynamic state. Here are some of the common characteristics of past extinctions that should be of concern to us. Volcanic upheaval, climate collapse, a disease outbreak, magnetic field reversal, which has happened in the last 3 out of 5 extinctions. So why scientists say, completely benign, and it may be very benign. But that accompany it, not benign. It's probably benign. The characteristics that are may cause complete system disruption from all the systems on the planet. We just don't know. No one's lived through it. The last one happened about 780 years ago. According to scientists, there was no one around to report what the effects of a reversal would be. You have a overturning of the oceans, which means various processes begin to break down in the ocean, including circulation, including submarine volcanic eruptions starting to happen. You have the composition of the acidity in the ocean changing. All these various processes begin to happen. So you have basically the oceans starting to die and break down. And then you have, in extreme cases, you have what's known as a tectonic plate reformatting or reformation. So these are some of the things that might herald, and this is why I say signs, because all of these are really major, so what we might be seeing now is just kind of signs leading up to maybe some more ominous changes on the horizon.
Have we seen any of those yet?
Well, we certainly have seen an escalation of a volcanic activity across the planet, and that's concerning. The other processes are beginning to happen, and they might be all rooted in the same cause. You have the mass begins to weaken, and it goes through a deviation and then a reversal. And so as that happens, you have the jet stream swinging in wild fashion all across the planet for reasons scientists still can't figure out why this is happening. It may all be rooted in the same thing, as well as we're seeing anomalies with the magnetic field of the planet, the radiation belt, and the South Atlantic anomaly, which is more prominent over South America. But all these processes might be rooted in the same thing. The planet goes through this reversal, and during this reversal, the climate of the planet begins to collapse, and the jet stream begins to swing around the planet in wild fashion. Now, why would the jet stream be swinging around the planet in wild, frantic fashion? Because the magnetic poles are starting to deviate. The magnetic north is moving towards Siberia, and the magnetic south pole is moving toward Australia. So as these processes begin to happen, you have everything being disrupted on the planet. And so we can begin to see that with the number of extreme weather events being reported. I mean, I don't remember in any time in recent history where we've had a heat wave being reported from one end of the planet to the other, which is really extraordinary that we're seeing something like this happen.
And this is actually occurring right now.
Yes, it's occurring right now, and I think that's one of the things which should alarm us is we beginning to see early process with the climate appears to be coming apart at the seams in ways we can't explain. Why is this happening? We're seeing record temperatures, record droughts, we're seeing record heat waves, record rainfalls. All of these events have no precedent in recorded history. So we're seeing something we've never seen before, we've never witnessed before, and it's all might be rooted, again, in some of the same geological processes that's disrupting our magnetic field and causing it to go into a reversal.
That is just craziness. That is crazy. It really is. I mean, because there's all right. Well, I'm going to go back to the other slide that we did. I'm going to go back to the geological time scale, that one, and that is it says volcanic upheaval, climate collapse, all those. What other ones are on there that are happening, or we should, or you think might start to happen now, or that we could pay attention to, that we could see coming, like over the
Well, we
horizon?
might be in early stages of all of them. As I said, we had the two 8.5 earthquakes that happened in April on the Indian Ocean plate. So scientists have already said that plate is beginning to break up. So we're seeing the possible formation of a new plate. We're also seeing what's called deep focus earthquakes. Quakes are happening very deep in the planet. We've never seen this happen before. Now we've had two, one with Tokyo just a few weeks ago, and then we had one, of course, in the Sea of Oshkosh, which was some time ago. So these again are warning signs that these processes and these changes they're happening deep within the planet, and there's something that's we've never witnessed before. So to have a tectonic plate begin to break up might be part of the same process that caused some of these other events to happen in the past. We had during the Triassic period, according to scientists, about 200 million years ago, Pangea broke up. We had the continents beginning to break up in tectonic plates. Now, whether you believe that or don't believe it, the reality is it happened. Now, if we believe in a shorter time, condensed time scale, where the Earth is not 4 billion years old, but maybe 6,000 years old or so, it's even more frightening, because that means all of these events can happen in a matter of days or weeks, as opposed to thousands or even millions of years. So it's a very frightening scenario, either way you look at it. But certainly, if you look at it from a time point of a young planet, a young Earth, then that means all these processes could start unfolding in a matter of weeks or days, as opposed to millions or thousands of years. And I think that's one of the things we have to at least approach with some degree of caution, that there's forces on this planet that are incomprehensible, that we can't understand the power and the sheer magnitude of the forces that shape life on this planet and can alter it or take it away in a literal blink of an eye.
No, you were just talking about the deep tectonic earthquakes. The one in Oshkosh and, well, it's not Oshkosh. Did I pronounce that right? What is that? The one in now they were pretty. They happened pretty far apart. Now, to me, that doesn't seem like a system. Like, that doesn't seem like a pattern, because they were so
It
far
doesn't seem
apart.
like a pattern, except they've never happened at all before. And so
Oh.
when you starting to see things you've never seen before, then you start to sit up and take note. If it happens one time, it's a coincidence. If it happens more than once, then there's nothing. It may be a casual, but it may be something synchronistic. It may be some type of link that we haven't established yet. And so this might be telling us that the processes within the planet are accelerating. These forces that are causing all this change to happen is starting to reach, and I believe has turned a corner and reached more serious, has reached the next, I should say, to reach the next level. And the next level meaning that we will begin to see even more dramatic events and even more widespread change than we've seen before.
So, what should I be keeping an eye out for? Like, for the next thing? So is there going to be like a group of, I mean, I know in the last few weeks since we've been off, there's been a lot of 6.0 and above and 7.0 and above, like a lot of them in a strong sequence. When you saw these, was that a concern for you? Was that a sign for you to say, it's happening, or things are happening, things are starting to actually get to a point to where there's no return?
Well, we're at a point where there's no return because when you look at the second law of thermodynamics, you understand that there's not a process that's ever going to reverse itself. So we're in this thing for the long haul. And according to the arrow of time, which means that processes are going to go through themselves towards some type of completion where it either runs out of energy or there's some massive, catastrophic force that changes everything on the planet. You start to come to an understanding that these events are spaced out. And I think that's giving us sufficient warning to start changing things on the planet, redirecting our economies toward a more ecologically attuned system to maybe not build and start to dehabulate some of these very dangerous, hazardous regions where, places like San Francisco. And I mean, all of this is unthinkable to the average person. You start talking about this, that we shouldn't be living in those regions that have to carry these high seismic risks. And I'm saying that we shouldn't be living in them as these events escalate. Not that we should move today or tomorrow,
Right.
but I'm just saying as these events start to escalate, we're going to have to seriously consider, not, founding cities in a crater of a volcano,
Right.
And
Yeah.
we're just asking. And then when these events happen without warning, we question, why is this happening? It's like, you build your house on the sand, the winds and the rain is going to knock it down. And so this is telling us that we need a more sound ecological approach to if we're going to have some type of sustainable culture and society on this planet, that we're going to have to start thinking about that and redirecting our energies toward more creative outlets rather than focusing so much on which I call the destructive mentality, the march to war and building in cities and places and putting people in places where they should not be in harm's way.
Yeah, but it's so beautiful. Those places usually. They're captivating.
They are captivating, and nature creates those, but we have to understand the geological processes that causes mountains to form and causes these cliffs and gives us these ocean views and all that also carries serious seismic risks, and we just have to be aware of that. And we didn't have to be aware of it 50 years ago, but going into the future, we're going to have to be aware of it. And so that's just part of it. If you want to survive, if you want to live into the future and carry your posterity into the future, then you're going to have to understand that you have to mitigate risk, and a way to do that is to not put yourself needlessly in harm's way.
Yeah. But I guess you could vacation there. Not everybody lived there. I mean, like you say, there are so many people and towns at the bottom of volcanoes.
I know, and you're not going to relocate those people. I
No.
think what's a more pressing concern for me, because a lot of these events will just happen. We'll just see loss of life in the hundreds of thousands of people.
Really?
And so, yes, because I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, if you told everybody, you got to leave Tokyo, I mean, who's going to do that? Nobody's going to do that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
places like Indonesia, I mean, if Toba went off, it would kill everybody in Indonesia, in those islands. Everybody would be killed. And so there's no question about it. And so, what are you going to do with that? How are you going to relocate 150 million people? I mean, how do you do that? And so I don't think we thought about that. We haven't thought about the logistic approach to that. We haven't thought about how that will impact other cultures. I mean, we have problems with immigration now, with a few thousand people trickling in into countries where you try to impose restrictions to keep people out that are not supposed to be there. So how would you relocate massive amounts of people in waves? We haven't been able to do that. We haven't been able to do it with wars. I have a refugee
Right.
problem with the wars, the civil wars going on in the Middle East. So it's a problem that people. It's like anything human. You have a ticking, you have a rubbing sound under the car under the hood, but nobody gives it any attention until it's an accident. And so that's just human. We're like that. We approach problems from the back end rather than the front end, and so because of that, we're probably less likely that we may end up with a planet rather than 7 billion people. We may end up with a planet of maybe 80 or 70 million people left on it. And that's not at all something out of science fiction. That's probably going to be more like a scientific fact.
Well, and I guess that's because what you were saying earlier is it has been a really long time since we've really had something very catastrophic to the planet. That it affected anyone globally. Anyway,
Right.
I mean, we've been very fortunate. We really have.
We have been fortunate, and one of the perils of science, and it is not something malicious. What it is, it's just a fact. When you stretch events out over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, then you make the likelihood of these scenarios happening very unlikely. You lull people into a false sense of security.
Absolutely.
And so when USGS says, well, last time Yellowstone erupted was 640,000 years ago, and so we don't estimate it happening again for 10,000 years. So when you stretch events over long periods of time like that, people are conditioned to think it can't happen. And so they're not doing this to be malicious. I'm just saying it's one of the fallacies of science that you have to deal with. And so, we can't, as a race, pick up and go to another planet. That's just not going to happen. Venus, the average temperature is 867 degrees. Lead melts at 612 degrees Fahrenheit. And Mars is 80 degrees below zero. So the atmosphere of Mars is 1% the density of Earth. It has no magnetic field, which means you would die of cancer within less than a year. So those planets, the idea of relocating, picking up and moving somewhere else, once we've wrecked this planet or we have to not deal with the possibility of cataclysms happening, picking up and relocating somewhere else is a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. And so we don't have the technology to do that. And anybody that plans to go to Mars would probably be dead in a year of cancer because the radiation, there's not a sufficient atmosphere around the planet to shield you from the hazards of the cosmic radiation coming in. So this is our planet. This is our home. We have to make the best of it, which means we have to live in concert with the planet's ecology and the geology of the planet and understand the risk factors. And the way to mitigate that is to start paying attention to the possibility that our planet can change very suddenly. I mean, all the ancients, from the Hopis on down to the Apaches and some of the Native Americans, have warned us over and over again that this planet can shift very suddenly and these can change very quickly. And we can be very much overwhelmed by the forces of the planet with almost no warning. And so that's happened repeatedly in the past. It's going to happen again. And so all we can do is, without trying to scare people to death, is just basically lay out the science and say, well, if you see there's an escalation of something happening over and over again, and then there's a chance, if, you pass a dozen signs saying you're coming into Tucson, chances are you're coming into Tucson. And so the science is leading the way to tell us that our planet is headed for some very, very dramatic change.
And I think that we're all just living our lives and we've been really, really fortunate. And that's why we're not aware of it. Like, are we not paying attention? However, because there's so many things that are happening, like what happened in Texas, just things like that, people are starting to pay attention that, hey, well, maybe something is going to happen or is happening a little bit more than they were before.
Well, I mean, if you look at the events that science can't seem to explain, I think that would be cause for concern. I mean, if you read those quotes on, for instance, on slide 5 about the climate, I mean, we can't explain that. There's no scientific explanation for it. And so, for rational man who live in a 21st century and a technology-driven world with supercomputers and quantum computers, to not be able to figure out simple processes of what's happening to this planet is mind-boggling. And so if they don't have the answers and the computers can't figure out what's going on, then I think we should be concerned because we quantify our existence based on what's around us. And so in relation to everything around us. So we have no quantitative way to measure or to gauge what's happening. in respect to the knowledge and information that we have, that's supposed to bring the information into our senses to make rational choices, then we're in trouble. And so we sort of sleepwalking and sort of a blissful ignorance to perhaps our own extinction. And that's not something out of science fiction. It's a reality.
Well, I think these things will maybe make people be a little bit more aware and be able to make changes. I mean, is it too late for even people to make changes? To even stop anything?
Well, I don't think we can stop anything. I think we have to live in concert with the change. Okay. I think there would be a lot less people.
But that's what you're talking about. And that's what I wanted
right.
to make clear. That's what we're talking about. We're like, these changes are coming and we have to learn to live with them and not be of fear, right? Is that what you're saying?
Not live in fear, live in awareness, not fear, as I always say. And I think you just make the best of what's happening and what's coming.
It's a really difficult thing to do. I mean, I giggle because I'm nervous about that. I can imagine all these people going through all this heartache. What happened to the people in Texas and then in India? I don't know that I wouldn't be able to stay focused. I think I would be in fear.
Well, I think some of these events, as the Hopi said, will give mankind a spiritual refocus. People talk about God doing this, God causing this to happen, God causing that to happen, God wiping people out because of sin and this, that, and the other. But who would want to approach anybody that's destroying them? So we have to be extremely careful about that, about telling people, well, this is because of this is because of that. I think for us to have understanding, what we should be expounding on, and to me, is the fact that our planet is going through all these changes, but there's so much beauty in the world, and there's all these forces that appear to be holding some of these terrible events in check, and I think speaks more of love and life flowing toward life and the perpetuation of life than anything else. So I'm amazed that, considering all the stuff that I know, that our planet is not more geologically chaotic than it is, and the fact that we've sustained life in a relatively almost a vacuum without any major geological hazards or disasters, cataclysm in the last, say, 6,000, 7,000 years. It has to be one of the wildest, you call a blessing, a stroke of luck in the universe. Because when you look at planets like Venus, who's tilted 177 degrees from its mean axis, when you look at planets like Uranus, when you look at planets like Mars, which has almost been sterilized geologically because of a series of cataclysms that's happened on the planet in the past, you have a deep appreciation that why is life continue to flourish on this planet, despite all of the calamities around us and some of the extremes that we look at. I mean, there's a volcano on Mars that's 16 miles tall, Olympus Mons, and you look at Mount Everest being 5 miles tall. So we can't imagine a volcanic system. It would block out the sun for forever. So something, jolting up in the sky 16 miles in height. So we live in a very fortunate we're very fortunate to be living on a planet that's been relatively more of a sort of a lifeboat that's kept us safe from so much chaos around us, and I think that calls just for a deeper appreciation. Not so much some of these things happen to punish us, but I think we should see it maybe in the other sense that we're extremely blessed and fortunate to be able to survive despite all the extremes around us, that there's no life anywhere appears to be outside the planet.
Well, and I think that's what I guess I secretly hope, that there is some type of a plan, and that maybe there is something else out there that's going to help us or intervene, so that way, if there's to be some cataclysmic event it would not end humanity, you know, or save us and help us. And I guess that's what I'm hoping for, and I'm hoping to hear from you. You know, those words of
Well, I think
encouragement.
NASA knows what I know, and I think what everybody that's been following this knows, that eventually, you're going to have to get the humans off this planet. I mean,
Eventually, like 20 years from now, or talking a
well, it
thousand
may be
years.
a billion years from now, but
Okay.
what I'm saying is there's a life cycle. Everything has life cycles.
Okay.
So at some point, this planet is going to become uninhabitable based on a series of cataclysms. Now, it could be everything we talked about as far as geological stuff. It could be a comet coming out of nowhere that we haven't even spotted yet. That's on a collision course to this planet. But sooner or later, the dice are going to come up snake eyes, and our number is going to come up. So at some point, even the sun is going to burn out, or everything has a life cycle. So at some point, you're going to have to get people off this planet. And I think, of course, for Christians, that's the hope of Christ coming back again. For people in the New Age, they see it as being the aliens coming to intervene. For scientists, they focusing on looking for other habitable planets in the solar system that are in the so-called Goldilocks zones. In other words, not too cold, not too hot, but just right to support life. And when you're looking for that, you're looking for conditions where you can have water, basically liquid water, because you got to have that to support life on any planet. And so you're looking for temperatures that are conducive for that process. So I think with everybody knows this is a reality, and so whether it's some people are more alarmed about it than others, I think everybody is concerned about it. And I think you just come to reality. You say, well, it happened to Venus, it happened to Mars. Some of the planets are tilted over on their sides. We can't explain why that happened. We're maybe the last one left in the scheme of things. Say, well, eventually it's going to happen to planet Earth. So you know that when you're surrounded by a billion comets, and there's so many asteroids, 3,000 or 4,000 just within our solar system that could potentially be life-threatening to this planet, that at some point, statistically, it's like you said, wandering across traffic during a rush hour, at some point you're going to get hit. And so I think just statistically, I think scientists and everyone else has that in the back of their mind at some point. You realize you're going to have to branch out if you want to continue for the human race to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. Like every other scary movie that has ever been created, you know, you just.
This is all rolled into one.
Yes.
Well, reality, truth is stranger than fiction, and reality is to me is scarier. And they were criticizing even the movie San Andreas as not being realistic enough to actually depict, and I don't think you can actually depict the trauma and the suffering. I mean, look at the rain, just what the rain did, and in Texas.
Yeah.
I mean,
you would never think that.
Exactly. You would never think that. And so it just takes something minute and small. And I'm not minimizing that or, the effect of that. What I'm saying is just one process like rain, something as simple as rain can create massive chaos. And I think they said, 35 trillion gallons of water fell in Texas through the month of May, which is, it's mind-boggling.
How does that even happen? That's just horrible.
Well, again, we're beginning to see the climate going through this process where it's beginning to start to unravel. And now we're starting to see the heat waves coming at earlier times. They're more widespread, extreme rain, extreme events, extreme heat. So this is going to be the case. The winters are going to become more severe. This is not climate change. This is what I call climate collapse. It's not changing, it's collapsing. And so when these processes begin to happen, you're going to see more and more extreme events, even to the point we're not even seeing Atlantic storms in the South Atlantic form anymore. It's been 4 or 5 years since we've had a major hurricane hit the United States. Not I'm wishing for that, but you see a whole disruption in that process. The warm air moving off the coast of Africa and causing these storm systems to form. So we're seeing these processes This is telling us the processes that perpetuate life and the meteorological processes on a planet is starting to break down.
But is it just one season that it didn't happen? I mean, or is it many seasons that it hasn't happened, those storms that you were just talking about? That's why you would think the system is down. I mean, can it happen just for 1 year?
Well, we haven't had it. The problem is we haven't seen all of this happening at the same time. Go back to slide number 7 and you look at that blob in the Pacific Ocean. Why is this happening? Scientists don't know why it's happening. Okay, so with all our technology, we don't understand this. Why is this warm water just sitting there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? There appears to be no reason for it. They can't figure out why it's happening, and it's something that's concerning because it's about 1,000 miles long, but it's only about 300 feet deep. So it's about 100 yards deep. So you can't. It appears to be something that might be caused from the surface because the average depth of the Pacific Ocean is about 14,000 feet. So it almost rules out the possibility of maybe subvolcanic eruptions that might be causing this. So it might be something that's affecting the surface that's causing it. But basically, when you have this kind of warm temperatures, it causes the hot air to rise, and you don't have the cooling wind patterns coming in to bring rain and to bring the snows that normally accompany the seasons. And so we're seeing major disruptions of the seasonal processes that start to happen. So it's not just in the Pacific, it's happening in the Atlantic. And you're starting to see more severe cyclones in Southeast Asia around that in the Ring of Fire. So again, all over the planet, from the melting of the Arctic to the thawing of the ice sheets in the Antarctica, processes across the planet, the climate is beginning to collapse and come apart at the seams. And I think this is all rooted in the same cause. We can't explain why all these things are happening. And they're all happening now. And this is what I'm saying. If it was happening as an isolated event, it'd be one thing. But the fact that all of these events are happening in concert tells us we have to step back and look at the big picture, that our whole planet right now is being affected by this change. And the changes has to be uniform. And the only way it can be uniform, it has to be happening within the interior of the planet.
And then if it's happening in the interior of the planet,
it's going to affect all processes all over the planet.
Then that's really big.
It's
right?
really big.
Yeah. Okay. And what do you think's going to be next? I'm sorry I put you in this position, but you're the guy. The guy we have to go to.
No, it's not a problem. I think we should look for more extreme events to start happening. And I think what will be disconcerting is to have major earthquakes happening back to back to back to back to back. I think at some point that will begin to take a toll on people. If it starts to happen in large cities, you're going to have major problems. I mean, what would we do if there was an 8.5 earthquake on the San Andreas Fault?
Right. Well, and that would just not be really good just because that movie came out, It would just, a lot of people are weird about that, at the San Andreas Fault.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all the supervolcanoes are inflating. They're all inflating. It's not one inflating, they're all inflating. And so, the only way, the second law of thermodynamics, the only way you can't depressurize something that's inflating. So it's going to keep heating up according to the laws of entropy until there's a cataclysmic disruption or eruption that's going to happen. It doesn't go back on itself. Heat moves toward entropy, and that's the way things work. They accelerate. They don't decelerate. And so the fact that they're inflating means they're going to erupt. Now, whether they all happen, one after the other, they're not connected certainly, but the fact that they're all happening and all inflating all over the planet is cause for alarm. This is never, if you look at the period of supervolcanic eruptions that's happened, they appear to be fairly spaced out. I think what's interesting is the last magnetic reversal we had about 780,000 years ago. There was a string of supervolcanoes erupting. Now, I'm not saying they caused this to happen, but there appears to be, as one scientist have demonstrated, there's hyperactivity in the magnetic magma plumes of the planet, which is what hotspots or what supervolcanoes are during periods of magnetic reversal. So this might be telling us that there is a hyper amount of activity happening in these magma plumes around our hotspots during the time of the reversal. And as this reversal process speeds up, these supervolcanoes will become more active. And so if you look at the last magnetic reversal, which happened about 780,000 years ago, Mauna Loa erupted about 700,000 years ago. Long Valley erupted about 700,000 years ago. And then Yellowstone erupted about 640,000 years ago. So geologically speaking, these were all pretty much almost back-to-back events. And so Mauna Loa, of course, is the largest volcano on the planet, as far as the mountain type of volcano. So these are, again, there may be, all these things might be rooted in the processes that what's affecting the entire planet, and that's why I'm saying we may want to pay particular close attention. The geomagnetic reversal may be benign, but the processes or the events accompanying it may be something that will change and alter life on this planet for all of us.
Now they're also they're having like the West and the East Pacific are having multiple large volcanic eruptions, and some are very quiet volcanoes too. So besides even the super volcanoes, there's that whole, like, it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Which again is causing a concern. If it was happening in one place, you would say, well, it's just a coincidence. But if it's happening to volcanoes all across the planet, then the change has to be coming from the interior of the planet, which means it's uniform, which means the change is much farther along than we probably think it is. That means we're past the halfway point of this happening.
Okay.
So we're now in the final phases of what's going to happen, that's going to unfold, and it only is going to intensify from here.
Okay, so what you mean by change is, all right, so if it's happening in the center, that means it's gonna like crack open, it's gonna seep up, like the magma. What? Honestly, I don't know what you mean.
Well, we just don't know how bad it can get. That's the degree of concern, and that goes back to the intervention period. How bad will it get before something happens? Either it's going to kill everything on this planet, or something is going to intervene to stop it, or take us off the planet. So that's the $1,000,000 question. I don't think anyone knows yet, because if you go back to the Permian extinction and a couple of the other extinctions where we had magnetic reversals, you can get something worse than a supervolcano erupting, where the entire crust of the planet begins to crack open. And you have that, they call that, we have the basalt floods, or what they call volcanic trap eruptions, which you have large igneous provinces erupting. The crust of the planet begins to crack open, and this happened in Siberia during the Permian extinction. And it happened again in the Deccan traps in India during the last extinction period. So it can go from bad to worst case scenario. And if any of these events happen now, where we have an area the size of Siberia, crust cracking open and having any type of eruption like that, then it's going to kill everything on this planet. I mean, this is like makes Yellowstone looks like a walk in the park. So the volcanic eruptions and the processes can be extreme. They can go to some very extreme degrees of change. And so you're looking at the amount of magma coming out of those type of eruptions. They can erupt for millions of years, according to scientists. So we may have something. And that's the thing you don't know with Yellowstone or something like one of the super volcanoes. It could erupt a week. It could erupt a year. Yellowstone could erupt for 100 years. You just don't know what could possibly cause it to shut it off once it gets started.
Well, yeah, what could possibly, like you're saying that something's happening in the center of the planet. Okay, what? Like really seriously, like what? Is it boiling? I don't, and I'm not trying to be smart. I'm just trying to picture what could possibly be happening in
Well,
there.
what happens is you have an increased heat. You have an increased heat because what happens with the magnetic field begins to go through a reversal. This is a theoretical process, so it's not. I'm not speaking for scientific fact
Gotcha.
here. There's some scientific fact, but we basically don't know because we can't see the interior of the planet. Here's what we think what happens.
Okay.
The theory is basically that you have a geomagnetic reversal. The planet's magnetic field begins to go through a process of it reverses polarity. Before it goes through a reverse polarity, you have what's called it starts to decline, a declination in field strength. So the propagation properties of the magnetic field begins to weaken. Then you have what's called a deviation, where the magnetic poles begin to deviate. They begin to wander across the planet. So the magnetic field is weakening, and it's happening 10 times faster than what we previously thought. So this could be a very accelerated process. This might be telling us things are really speeding up. So it goes through this process of weakening. The poles begin to wander, and then you might have a situation where it activates or it makes all the hotspots more kinetic, which means you start to activate all the supervolcanoes, or it increases activity at them. Then what happens with this is all brought about, but what we think about an extreme fluctuation in internal temperatures within the planet. So if this process with this heat is not, so what happens? All the volcanoes start to erupt because all the heat is moving from according to laws of thermodynamics, heat moves from higher concentration to lower concentration. So you have the heat flow moving from the interior of the planet to the exterior of the planet. And the way you dissipate heat is through the magma is through volcanic eruptions. They basically vent the heat from the planet. So if the volcanoes start erupting because of all this heat is building up on the planet. So at some point, there's only about 1,500 volcanoes on land, terrestrial volcanoes. So at some point, you're going to reach what's called a threshold, which means not enough volcanoes can erupt on land to cool the planet off. So when that doesn't work, then the supervolcanoes have to erupt because they represent a larger heat process of dissipation. So you get to this point where you start waking up all these volcanoes and saying you have to start venting because we're overheating. And so this is why all the volcanoes are waking up, because you have this process where we're going to approach a singularity with a threshold. If you can't get enough volcanic systems to start erupting, then we're in trouble, because that means the next stage would be the supervolcanoes have to go off. And so that might be why they're all inflating, because this heat is already at a situation where it's a runaway process. In other words, we reached the Rubicon. Rubicon is a halfway point where there's no return. And so when this happens, then we're in trouble. And we may be already at that stage. And by the time scientists come to this realization, it may be too late to do anything about it. So there's nothing you can do about it. So what you don't want to do is start talking about it, creating this sense of fear where everything breaks down on the planet, because people lose the will to live and to go on and to go to their jobs and pay their bills and so forth. So you make the best of a worst case scenario. You just say, well, we'll just ride it out, and we'll let them know as we need to let them know based on the events, which is probably the way we should do it, because you can't do anything about it, and you don't want to cause panic to cause a planet-wide disruption of processes on this planet and a breakdown of society. So you handle this in a very careful manner. Now, if I've come to this realization, surely all the talking heads and the academic scientists and the geologists have reached the same conclusion I've reached, that at some point, we're in trouble. And so typically the planet reaches a balance. If it reaches that balance, the heat begins to sort of dissipate. You have a mild reversal, and then everything goes back to normal. If this doesn't work, then we have what's called the cataclysm by maybe even volcanic eruptions happening. Ash fills the air. The planet goes into an ice age, kills about almost everything on the planet. The planet cools off, and then the process goes back into a sort of state of remission, and then the whole process starts all over again. So that's the worst case scenario. If this planet can't self-regulate itself, then we're in trouble. If it tilts to the extreme, then we have what's called an extinction by geological processes.
So just because we're in the next phase and we might be in the sixth extinction period does not mean that it has to be an extinction where humanity is almost wiped out. Like if the planet can self-regulate, it might not be as catastrophic, or is it
Right.
no
It
matter
may not
what?
be as catastrophic, and
Okay.
you may have some mild processes happening. The fact that so many volcanoes, though, are waking up out of dormancy is not a good sign, because
Okay.
that's telling us is the active systems are not adequate enough to vent the heat. In other words, the heat is building up. It's sort of like you're cooking for Thanksgiving. It's like one burn on the stove is not going to do the trick. So you have to turn on fire every burn on the stove to get
Okay.
the job done. And so what this is telling us is that we might be approaching a situation where the planet is tilting toward that extreme, and if that's the case, then certain other dire things will be accompanying that or on the horizon, and none of them are good, for us. But humanity has managed to get through worst case scenarios, and so you may be a light. It may be a light bulb of people surviving,
Mm-hmm.
and it may be a handful compared to what's living on the planet now. But you just do your best to try to get through it.
All right. Well, let me ask you this, and I know I keep on going back to this, but you said we're at the Rubicon. That's like you maybe the halfway point, and there's no return. But
Right.
what if we found out earlier? What would the thing that we could have done was like move people away from areas, certain areas, or what even could have been done then? Like if we knew 100 years ago that this was going to happen, what could we have done then? Nothing.
Well, I think if you know something, extinction, and by that very word, is something you don't see. It's kind of like someone said, if everyone knew it was an extinction, and knew it was coming, it wouldn't be an extinction.
Okay.
I think these events sneak up on us, and they happen with little or no warning. So I think it will go from what we are now to, if it gets to that bad, then it will be a situation where we'll quickly escalate to that. So before you have time to really put all the pieces and connect all the dots, it will be too late. Um, the only thing you can do, going back to previous extinctions, say when Toba erupted, and this is from a scientific standpoint, if you understand the science and believe that the planet is millions of years old. According to scientists, there were two groups of people living on the planet. There were people living in Africa who were walking upright, and then there were the Neanderthals who were living around Asia at the time. So it was two groups of people. So the entire population of the planet, basically the people who moved down to southern parts of Africa, are the ones that basically survived. It was like 3,000 or 4,000 people. When they go back and look at the genetic diversity of the human race, it's very small. In other words, people were just interbreeding and intermarrying and so forth, according to scientists. So the genetic diversity of humans can be traced back to, just a few people. So they call it the bottleneck, the human bottleneck. So whether you believe that or don't believe it, the point is, when or even go back to something like the flood of Noah, where only 8 people survived, you still coming back to that same scenario where these events are so catastrophic that the planet is in such isolation. It may be separated by ash, it may be separated by oceans of water, it may be separated by volcanic eruptions, crust cracking and breaking open. Whatever you believe, you know that only few people who just happen to probably be fortunate to be in the right place at the right time are going to survive this. And the rest of the human race is just not going to make it. And so, it's just one of those things you have to, just deal with when you deal with it, and just go on and find the strength to go on through
Oh, oh, my dear. It's the end of our show. I cannot believe it went by that fast. Can you believe that? It's already over.
Yeah, it does go by fast.
It goes so fast. You're really good at what you do, and I really appreciate it. And how about you tell everybody where they can find you and other new places and all the other stuff you're doing?
Okay. Well, thank you, and thank you for all the listeners that's supported us and followed the information even from the beginning, and who's still with us, and who make all of this possible and getting the word out to everyone else. So I thank them for all of it. I give them all the credit for it. The extinctionprotocol.wordpress.com. You can find us on the blog there. You can find us at Utopia Collapse, the Collapse, our sister blog, which keeps up with geopolitical events and other events going on in the world. We have the Extinction Protocol YouTube channel, which you can click on and subscribe to our channel, which we're going to upload this program. So if you did miss it and didn't catch the live broadcast, you get to watch it again or share it with others through Facebook, which we're also on Facebook. And then the books. You can find any of my books on lulu.com.
You have a whole lot of them. They're really good.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very blessed and very fortunate.
Now, also, to help support your blog, that there's a place on there so you donate if you feel like you want to, help us keep going, Alvin, keep going. There's a place on there so you can donate and keep it going. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We are so happy to be back, and we love you all. And have a great rest of your weekend, and see you next week.